Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to AlterCOP 30 Philippines special mini series, where we uncover stories of the humans behind this program. By the way, my name is CK Asinas, and I'm one of the co-creators of Sustainer Rumble and the host of this mini series. Our conversation today will be centered on youth futures, where youth is driving change and innovation for regenerative futures in the Philippines. And to open this up and make this a fruitful conversation than to have two incredible individuals to talk to us about what they're doing and how they're addressing the most challenging problems within their communities or the communities that they serve or support. And this is where I really ponder about a lot of these things. And there's a moment when information stops being just information and becomes deeply personal. It's when you realize that the crisis you're hearing from the news or from other people is actually happening to someone you love. For two young Filipinos, that moment changed everything. One of them grew up watching their childhood unfold in two different worlds. They received the best education in the Philippines or the Philippines could offer, while their cousins faced constant threats of conflict and violence. The other received terrifying news about their father's heart condition, then discovered they had the same genetic risks. Both turned to knowledge for answers, and both discovered uncomfortable truths about their country. The first learned that 26 million Filipino students lose access to education every year, not because of the lack of resources or teachers, but because of floods, typhoons, and storms that keep getting worse. The second traced why their friend from Tondo was struggling to consistently afford healthy food, despite farmers selling cabbage for just 7 pesos, while consumers paid over 100. They found 9 layers of middlemen and 30% waste built into a broken system. These simply weren't problems you could just read about and move on. So they taught themselves what they need to know. One learned how to create workbooks and simulate an entire curriculum of students or for students who lost their schools. The other learned to code from YouTube videos and built algorithms to connect farmers directly to buyers. From those personal moments came two initiatives. Kahon ng Karunungan brings education in a box to over 1,000 students displaced by disasters across four continents. Cultivado, on the other hand, connects 100 farmers to restaurants and communities, cutting out the middlemen so that everyone gets a fair deal. Two different stories, two different solutions, but the same belief that the education and access shouldn't depend on where you're born or whatever crisis comes. Today, we meet two young people who aren't waiting for systems to fix themselves. They're building something better. And so, it is my privilege to welcome to the show, Kahon ng Karunungan's very own Razel Suwansing and Cultivado's very own Haley Yap. Hi, Razel and Haley. Thank you for joining the show. How are you both doing today?
We're doing well. Thank you, CK, for introducing us.
And Razel, how are you?
Good. Thank you for the invitation,
No, I
CK.
mean, this is that's such a privilege because this is not something that we can actually have on a day-to-day basis. And I think it's just really a good opportunity to share your story and what you do to the larger public, especially those that really wanted to get into to where you're to the industries or you're in and basically in the work that you're doing as well. And so I'd like to start this off by dabbling into your to the moment that when you started your initiatives. To Razel, first, let's have you. What made you think that a box of learning materials could actually make a difference for a lot of students?
So I was looking at the, I mean, for decades, almost like 15 years of my life, I was watching consistently every week almost from July to December, just an onslaught of these typhoons. And suddenly when I was 15, I was thinking this question popped up in my mind, like, how are these students learning? Well, actually I was in school. How are these students learning when most of the year they weren't actually in school? This was the case for the students in Malagnat National High School, where they lived in the mountain province. Their treks were impassable because of these typhoons, these winds, these flooding situations. So I was thinking, how were they essentially learning? And then I reached out to the district congressperson. I also reached out to the school themselves, and they were saying that these students were just in their houses. There was no way for them to learn. And I came up with pretty much the simplest solution I could find, because I find that these simplest solutions were the easiest to implement and thus had the most impact. I just thought of a box that how do we put a knowledge in a box, which is kahanang karunungan. And I also imagined that this had to be the least technologically intensive option, because this had to reach the most peripheral areas. So this was really the mountain province, where students had to trek for 2 hours to reach their schools. There was no signal, cellular signal. How was I going to make the simplest solution? So I came up with this box, and I'll explain later what's the contents inside.
Really wonderful, Razel, and the I think a lot of people mistake that a lot of innovation actually also comes from the simplest and most straightforward solutions. Doesn't have to be very cool. Doesn't have to be like exciting. Just has to be very useful and just has to understand really what's going on and work around that. So that was actually a very wise decision that you made there, Razel. And from your experience looking hearing from your story, I mean, you've seen how these students operate, how they go to school, how they learn. And so for these people who have um, all of these means, then having such essentials just ready to go and ready to use just really makes education much more accessible to them. Haley, okay, so I'd like to know, when did it click that you needed to build something yourself? What was that conversation like with your friend from Tondo when you were, talking about the challenges that they were having with food, and how does everything add up?
Yeah, so it was very much almost like a slow burn. So for several years before I had that conversation with my friend, it really all started when my dad faced that health issue and when I started becoming a little bit more conscious about our personal diets and the food that we put in our bodies. After fixating on that, I eventually stumbled on the Eat Lancet Planetary Health Framework, which was a diet that was good for human health but also planetary outcomes. So around that period, that's when my friend finally reached out and told me about this issue. So she talked about how difficult it was to consistently afford healthy food and how that constantly affected her own concentration in school, how she wasn't able to focus on her schoolwork. And so because all of these experiences added up, it really made me realize that these issues are interconnected. Yes, we have a problem with health, and we also have an environmental issue in the Philippines, but at the same time, it also affects people's educations because of inefficient systems. And so, this conversation with my friend happened over text. It was very brief, but it left a lasting impression. And I would say that that's when it really started to click. And so, over time, I essentially just tried learning about what solutions already existed in the Philippines to see if I could recommend anything to my friend and see if I could help out in any way I could. And so that's when I started realizing what supply chain inefficiencies there were in the food system. And it also opened my eyes to the fact that there are actually already a lot of cooperatives and community initiatives aiming to solve this problem. However, they're often limited in geographical reach due to difficulties accessing markets and resources. So, when my friend and I found out about the opportunity to join the Earth Prize, which was a competition that would give a prize for people who could actually come up with a developed solution, we thought this was the perfect opportunity to start developing a solution to the problem while also getting the support and mentorship we needed. So it was very much a long process over several years.
Something very, I would say, interesting about finding something that you didn't really expect to find, and then that sort of like sets you off to is that maybe you haven't really thought of before. And I think that's what happened with you, Haley. And um, I guess that specific experience led you to a road where you're now making much more impact, and a lot of good things, I also presume that happened after that, but we will dive into that as we go through this conversation. Now, going back to you, Razel. So we talked about the cajons, right? And you mentioned that you wanted to to explain what goes inside the cajon. Now, okay, can you tell us more about the items that we can find in a cajon? Say, for example, I'm a student. Well, what will I be able to find once I open this magic box?
So in the beginning, the cajons were makeshift. So I wanted it to have the aesthetic of a cajon, and I used these banig cajons, but there were also bags, so they're cajon bags that they were also banig because I wanted to use the local materials in the area. And then I realized that wasn't very sustainable because the workbooks would peak out. So now we have our own suppliers for the creation of backpacks. So that's more sustainable, in my opinion. And the first cajons just were not visually sophisticated. We just put them together,
Yeah.
and we just needed it just needed the words to be there. It
Just
needed,
needed to launch it.
yes, it just needed to serve their purpose. Um, but then
That was your MVP.
yeah. And I was just thinking that what do the students really just need to work? Because we put this together in 2 months, or no, we put this together in 3 weeks
Uh-huh.
because again the students needed it because they couldn't go to school because of natural disaster. So we put this together with the teachers. We asked the student leaders what they think their peers needed, but then also the teachers, and we constantly revise this. And we really just came to we need a workbook, we need materials. We were thinking for elementary school students, we have coloring materials. We wanted to make it more fun. But then for high
Huh?
school students, just ball pens and pencils, just the school supplies they needed. And we tried to find the most durable materials. And I was thinking, what was really important for us was consulting with each partner school because usually there are local and geographical particularities in each province, region, and even municipality, barangay. So we really wanted to make that happen. So I would say they weren't super visually appealing, but the words were there and the knowledge
Yeah.
there. And now that we have these workbooks, they're more sophisticated now. They're more beautiful. We work with graphic designers, but what was most important to us was consulting with these students after distributing these workbooks at a 3 and also 6 month timeline. As time goes on, we consult with them with less frequency, as with most of these implementation frameworks. We ask them what works, what doesn't, and is it still engaging? Because I think that was the biggest issue that we faced. How will we make it engaging that these teachers don't have the bandwidth to consult so frequently with each student since they're all at home? And these teachers, even with natural disasters, with these roads that are impassable, they would still try to go to each student. So how do we make it engaging? So we have to localize the knowledge and consistently revise these workbooks to make the exercises more interesting.
Interesting. And you know, it seems like there's a lot of things that you can actually do in a cajon, and whatever whatever I would say, perhaps maybe maybe you can customize it per curriculum, per age range, or subject, or whatever. And so I guess then there's a really strong potential. I mean, I always say it doesn't really have to be attractive. I mean, your first product doesn't have to be that attractive, because what you just need to do is just really put it out there, make sure that it serves its purpose, and then you there. I mean, when we started in Sustain a Rumble, the audio was S. I can't say the word, but it was S. it wasn't. It wasn't. It wasn't really good. But then we said, okay, we need to use our voice and share our story. That's what's most important. And then we just learn along the way. Okay, this is how we're now doing it because this is what we find out. So I mean, you learn, you do things, and then you grow from there. And I think that's what you just did. So that was wonderful. Now, Haley, um you, you started cultivado, and of course you already gave us sort of like a premise on how you're doing now and your recent experience as you go on the ground. Now, what was the hardest part about building cultivado from scratch, and when did you know that this platform could actually work?
Okay, so I think the hardest part about building Gotabado is really understanding the problem, because without understanding the problem, we wouldn't be able to know where we could help out. And the reason why this was so difficult is because the food system in the Philippines is so complex. Again, there's up to 9 layers of middlemen, and oftentimes the system or this process isn't widely documented online. So we found we really needed to get on the ground, reach all of these areas which were normally inaccessible, and really chart out the problem. So obviously, as like full-time students, we had to find 3-day weekends and holidays where we could go and venture out, and then also convince our parents to come with us and to bring us there. And so one memory that I have in my mind is the first time I visited farmers all the way in Sagada. And on the way there, it was a 3-day weekend to school. The road suddenly collapsed on us on the side of the mountain. And so we still went through that, and we visited farmers and chatted with them on the ground. Through them, we were able to start mapping out the process. And it was really interesting because you're turning these stories into a systematic process or flow chart so you can really understand what choke points there are in the system. And even now, although we tested out our platform and saw if it could actually work within a similar, like up to a little less than 1 month period when we were applying for the EART prize. Our solution undoubtedly like still isn't perfect. We're still learning as we go. And I think that's really the most important part when you're dealing with a food system that's so complex and with something with so many moving parts. The most important part for us has been opening ourselves to learning and constantly refining our solution. We've also accepted the fact that it's okay not to have perfect solutions as long as you take action and then you start refining from there and you keep opening yourself to learning.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Haley, and I think that that resonates with a lot of us who really try to do something, regardless if we're starting a new initiative or maybe doing something or making something work in our own respective workplaces. I mean, not everything is supposed to be perfect. It just has to work, and by doing and by implementing, and that's when you discover, okay, how can I further improve this? What were the gaps in what we did in the past, and how do we mitigate these gaps and try to provide something a lot better than the earlier version. And so I think that's what you just did. So that was really great, Haley. And I mean, mapping out the food system is such a complicated task. I don't think I can do something like that. So that was incredible work that you just did. You're doing over there, Haley. And yeah, a lot of people on the ground, especially farmers, are benefiting from what you're already doing. Now, now let's shift the conversation to, okay, you started, you had all of these experiences, and that sort of opened your eyes to a lot of things. And so you that's when you thought, okay, how do I address these challenges? And so you have this overall vision, and perhaps in your head you have this long roadmap, and this is what you really wanted to do. Perhaps 5 years from now, this is what you want to happen. But surely in the life of an entrepreneur, as an innovator, there were wake up calls along the way, that really sort of like grounded you a bit and helped you really sort of refine your approach to things. Now, to Haley first. So, when you were mapping out the food systems, uh, what what were the certain things, or perhaps if you could name one, what was the what was that one thing that surprised you the most about it? And what does and question number two is what does it actually look like when you said earlier that 30% of the produce gets wasted before it reaches people?
Okay, that's a really good question. So, there were so many things that surprised me about the food system, but I'd say the most surprising was, first of all, the gap between what farmers were getting. So, they were getting 7 pesos from middlemen per kilo at the time I visited, and then seeing that people in Metro Manila were getting 100 pesos. And so when I was talking to the farmers, I realized that a big reason for this is that because of quote the forces of supply and demand, there were a lot of middlemen at trading posts that would control and basically dictate prices. These prices would change almost every single hour. And oftentimes prices would get so low that sometimes it was cheaper for farmers to just simply let produce rot on their fields than to actually send it to the trading posts. And this is why there's so much waste that's incurred. You have a lot of these vegetables that are just wasted on fields because of how low the prices are at the time that the farmers get. And on top of that, there are also instances where, for example, in a certain season, farmers will notice, oh, let's say tomatoes did really well. They sold for really, really high prices. And so the following season, they're going to plant a lot of tomatoes because they think it will also receive the same amount of money as in the previous. However, because all of these farmers are starting to create tomatoes together, there's essentially an oversupply of tomatoes and the price goes crashing down. So, on top of just those forces of supply and demand that make prices very low, these farmers also suffer from a lack of communication technology and a lack of access to information about the prices that are that these vegetables are receiving at the market. So, really, to sum this up, what surprised me was just how much produce got wasted because of miscommunication, but also how much produce got wasted because of these unfair prices that were being charged to the farmers.
Hmm. Yeah, and you know what? I mean, this is actually, I would say a known problem. I've seen also a lot of like people try to address this this gap in the food system, and it's been very hard. And I do agree that a lot of farmers aren't really getting what they deserve in the entire scheme of things, especially since they're the ones who are were working the hardest, and they're supposed to be uh they're supposed to have a fair livelihood, but then apparently because of these challenges in the system, then that robs them of the opportunity to live better lives and have better life outcomes. And so, to Razel, so now turning it over to you now, talking about the cojons again. So you mentioned, or from your story, that uh, you've had this experience. You've seen, say, students being affected by conflict and violence, and that hampers their learning, and also even in their formative years. Now, you've provided cajons to a lot of students already, but you also saw that millions more are being affected, with perhaps a much bigger challenge. Now, tell us about that moment when you understood that cajons weren't just enough,
Mhm.
when you found that millions more were being affected as you helped others who constantly receive your support.
Mhm. So I wanted to say that K&K started as more of an education equity NGO because
Mhm.
again my main story was that my mother was an internally displaced person, so her education was also affected by the conflict in Mindanao that has lasted for 5 decades. So that was really the thrust of, as you will see also, my academic research and a lot of the work that I did in college and also my research papers. But as I realized, especially in our generation, we we have this paramount issue that affects 26 million Filipinos that
Mhm.
um, I was thinking we needed to do something to address this because when we were distributing haphazardly these cajons to these partner schools, the students didn't understand why they needed to stay home and why these periods of school closures were so frequent and why they were so protracted. And with the terminology in the Philippines, we call them natural disasters, but there is now a move to move away from that term because these are not natural disasters. It's kind of in the Philippines, we think it's an inevitability every year. We do have these typhoons. Now, with the amount of earthquakes we have, it's because we're in the Pacific Ring of Fire. But it's not the case. There are a lot of anthropogenic systems that coincide to worsen these conditions, specifically exacerbating anthropogenic causes for climate change. And that's what I wanted the students to learn because they were increasingly becoming more disempowered, especially the students in Malagnat National High School, because the natural disasters, as they call them, which is the climate crisis induced disasters, were worsening in frequency and also in intensity. And they said that maybe it's just the hands that life has dealt us, that we live in these difficult terrains and we just have to deal with it. But I wanted to emphasize that this was not the case, that they could do something to affect their own conditions, that we as Filipinos can do something to affect these conditions. So it was really the realization that though we were impacting thousands of lives for our last 8 years, 7 years, I was thinking we were not acting fast enough and aggressively enough because of this number, 26 million Filipinos. And I think we're at 110, 120 million. 26 million learners each year of that 120 million Filipinos are affected by this one issue. So I thought we have to do something to address this, to empower our youth and refine our product, as CK was alluding to earlier.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, climate change is really a huge hindrance for a lot of us, not only in the educational system, but even in the overall, I would say, or all, with other aspects of life. And I would say that perhaps a lot of us are just uh, maybe affected less by these, and so maybe a lot of us really don't experience the same amount of impact to our lives directly. But to these children who don't have a lot of means and are constantly threatened by these natural disasters, they are oftentimes left with little to no options, and that makes life for them a lot harder, especially since they're just kids and they just wanted to learn, go to school, meet up with their friends, and live without any worries supposedly. Now, going back to you, Haley. So you mentioned the food systems already, and then the revenue gap the farmers are getting, and then the food waste that that takes place along the way and throughout the supply chain. Now, how did you come to understand that these things aren't separate problems, that and that fixing the food system is also about fixing health outcomes for a lot of people?
Yeah, good question. So, like I mentioned a while ago, it almost was like a slow burn. So, basically, beforehand, I was really lucky because I reached out to these planetary health experts and these experts with the Eat Lancet Planetary Health Framework. And they essentially mentored me and they taught me about the intersection between human health, but also environmental health. So that was the first time that my worldview was really widened because I realized these two problems, which I had seen as being separate from one another, actually deeply impacted each other. And they were almost a cyclical cycle, right? So if we eat healthy now, and if we support the environment, then that just means that we have more access to food that can also continue supporting our own health. And so that was what first opened my mind to this idea that these two very large concepts could be interconnected. So when my friend texted me, it was like right after I'd gotten off of a meeting with those mentors. And so that's when it like clicked in my mind. I was like, wow, okay. So like I've found a connection between the health and the environment. And now my friend is saying that she can't afford these like healthy food items because things were getting more and more expensive. So after researching about that, I realized, okay, it's all interconnected. You have the health together, you have health together, you have the environment together, but you also have this logistics problem and this infrastructure problem. And so it was really almost like putting together a puzzle piece. And I think the biggest part that really helped me figure out that these weren't separate problems was seeking out knowledge from other people, seeking out knowledge from those wiser than me, from those with different worldviews and different perspectives. It's when you really open yourself to new learnings and opportunities that you are able to connect these problems together. And so, like, I still remember there's a really good book that I read called The Go Giver. And basically, what it says is that you get the most out of life and you get the most fulfillment out of life when instead of thinking about how you can be a quote go getter, trying to seek out opportunities solely for yourself, you instead open yourself up to others and open yourself up to what other people need and what they're saying. And when you do that, you're able to find these connections and these um, connections between different fields that you can basically weave in together and create solutions for.
Mhm. Yeah. Such a wonderful work, and I guess that's really, from my experience dabbling into tech and innovation, a lot of the most clever and also realistic solutions come from merging two principles together, and or merging two main principles together, sharing the same attributes, and coming up with a product or a service that um, offers something different, something innovative, but still relevant for the challenge, or for the problem at hand. And so, I mean, we're excited to see what else comes from Cultivado, Haley. Now, going back to you, Razel, we touched on the climate problem already, and perhaps we're already very familiar with how climate change is affecting us on a day-to-day basis. Say, for example, us living here in Manila and seeing, how destructive it could get. Now, could you give us more details about the situation in the provinces with these students, with these kids in local communities? What does, being climate vulnerable mean on day to day for them, and what else are they losing beyond just the school days that they're supposed to have?
So the climate crisis is a global crisis and is a massive national crisis for us because we consistently have ranked in the last, I would say, 5 years as the most vulnerable country to the adverse effects of climate change. Out of all the countries in the world, the Philippines is the most affected. And we have seen that even here in Manila, we have seen that every year. The summers are getting hotter. We are reaching 40 degrees centigrade. We have more typhoons. The La Nina periods are getting longer. When I was younger, they would start maybe mid-August and November, and now they start as early as July and they end in December. And with every global crisis, as we've seen in the pandemic, the climate crisis will most and are is mostly most adversely affecting those with the weakest houses, those with the weakest classrooms, those with the weakest financial safety nets. And the climate crisis will hit our poorest and youngest communities the hardest. And it is ingrained in our culture, in our history, our bayanihan mentality. And I genuinely believe that all Filipinos have the moral imperative to restore the agency of these most vulnerable Filipinos. And as I keep alluding to, the Malagnat story is just so potent in my mind and is really the reason that we have pushed this KNK advocacy for so many years throughout college. And now that I'm working in my professional life, I've still pushed this because of this story. And I remember vividly, this was actually 8 years ago. So imagine with the worsening situation of the climate crisis, what the situation is. These students would trek, as I think we have heard from stories of the mountain province, that people trek to receive tattoos from amazing indigenous artists. But imagine these students have to do this. This is not a travel guide for them. This is not a once in a lifetime experience. This is their daily reality that they have to trek from their houses on top of these mountains to go to school. And these treks that are yeah, these zip lines that are makeshift zip lines.
Mhm.
And they also use these land bridges that are impassable wooden. And they also rely on these hanging bridges that are barely held up by these pieces of wood. These are all makeshift. Imagine this is a normal day. Imagine doing this in the intense heat of the summer with the climate crisis. Imagine doing this with the powerful typhoons that they experience every year. And when they get to school, this is only the commute. When they get to school, they are greeted with these cemented rooms, and there are 50 students in I think 100 square meters. I'm not very good at this
Mhm.
architecture, but it's very it's barely a foot or half a foot between each student. And they also have, because of the lack of resources, they also have these cellophane aluminum ceilings and roofs that conduct heat. So these roofs are barely hang on during the typhoons, and most of them are actually blown off and they have to get reconstructed every year. But during the summer they conduct heat. So this is the reality of these students who face just the daily perils of commuting, and during the summer they have to face the daily perils of heat stroke. So this is the story of students who are in the most vulnerable and peripheral areas. And CK asked, what are they losing aside from these learning days? And I still believe, despite the growing economic inequality, that knowledge and education is a great equalizer. That's why I believe in what K&K is doing for almost a decade now. And I genuinely believe with this lack of resources in education, they are losing their dignity. They're losing the agency to take control of their lives and to achieve a future that they have the right to. And without knowledge, I believe there can be no action. And the climate crisis and the anthropogenic causes, again, and also these systems that we have created are exacerbating these realities and taking away their agency and their dignity.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's been remarkable to me, especially in the past um, few months. You know, as we dealt with some of the strongest typhoons recently, and that sort of resurfaced the whole political issue that we know. You know, I won't name because we already know that issue, and that brought to the surface a lot of the things that really perhaps uh weren't made known to a lot of people, a lot of Filipinos. And I also recently discovered, and maybe I know this from the past, but I also rediscovered something about students. Yes, you mentioned in the provinces, 50 students having to cramp within small classrooms. Then there are also what we call aisle learners who essentially could not sit. They have to like sit in the aisle, right? And then just maybe sit on the floor rather, and then that's where where they study, which is, I would say, uh not dignified. As looking back to my experience in school, where I was able to sit in a specific chair and be able to go through each schooling day with the chair that I can sit on. I mean, it might sound very basic, but it's a I think it's a fundamental right for every student to have that level of comfort for learning. And so we've tackled these challenges, and I thank you both for giving us more details on your grounding experience. Now let's talk about growing your impact. Now, you started somewhere. You've given us where details about what sparked your interest in starting your initiatives, and you've also given us more details about um, what sort of like grounded you and helped you, develop your solutions into something more realistic and more impactful for the communities that you support. Now, talking about growing, to you, Razel, first, why was it important to contextualize the cajons for each locality instead of creating this national grand curriculum that's sort of gonna perhaps be offered to a lot in general?
Well, I feel that again, I've been talking to the students on the ground for almost a decade, and I feel that they do not understand their heritage, their history, their culture because of how we have been taught and the culture in the Philippines stated on and these foreign cultures. Um, so without an understanding of, I don't know if I'm here. Okay, I'm back. Okay. So I feel that without
We're
an
back.
understanding,
Yes.
yes. Okay, I might move to another location. But without an understanding of this history, this heritage, this culture, I feel there can be an of the self. And again, on a practical level, how do we keep them engaged without the students, without the classrooms, without the teachers that reinforce this learning every day?
Mhm. I think I'm not sure if it's just on my end. I think we kind of lost Razor, but that's okay.
Also on
Um,
my end.
yeah, we can pick up from there, Haley. So, I,
Mhm.
I I mean, my question for you is that you have to deal with two players in the chain,
Yeah.
right? The farmers and the buyers. Now, how are you able to convince both sides that this solution is working, even if you have no formal business background?
Okay, so we first started small. So we started with the people within our community and really getting them on board with our solution. So before even that, I'll just contextualize a little bit and back up with where we created the solution and how we created it. So obviously, like trying to give our solution credibility, but also trying to find a space where we could get mentored by people. Me and my partner on this project, we searched out different competitions, different accelerators that we could go towards and that we could enter. And we essentially tried creating opportunities for ourselves. In doing so, we happened across the Earth Prize, which I've mentioned multiple times, but I haven't really introduced yet. Essentially, it's the largest youth sustainability entrepreneurship competition, and it's really
Hmm.
about creating youth-led solutions to the climate crisis. And so through that network, we essentially were able to develop our solution through their guiding questions, but also gain mentorship from university students around the world, but also their judges who are also experts from foundations such as the Rockefeller Foundation. And so by going through that process, we were really able to flesh out our idea. And when we eventually won as the Southeast Asian Oceania winners for that, that really boosted our credibility. So it basically showed that our solution was vetted by people and that it was well thought out and that it was built. And so essentially, the message from that is we sought out opportunities to really learn from other people and to also gain that credibility that we needed. And so after we won the Earth Prize, we essentially tapped into their network, but also reached out to local Philippine companies that were willing to help test this out, whose goals aligned with our mission. And back to what I mentioned at the start, where we first tapped our own communities, we learned that in our school community before, an international school, Manila, um, there was essentially a mom who was connected with a farmer from Tarlac. And this mom would basically help that farmer sell their produce in the Philippines, getting past all of those middlemen by allowing the farmer to essentially sell her produce to all of the families within our school. And so although it's been several years, I believe it's been more than 4 or 5 years since this happened, and although that family moved abroad, we got back into contact with that very same farmer, And because she'd worked with people like us in the past, she was very interested in the solution and was very eager to explore this with us. So, another message or takeaway from that is basically looking into your own communities to find people who are willing to help out and who are as equally passionate about the solution as you are. And so through that farmer, we were essentially able to access her network of 100 farmers, some of which are her family members, but also some of which live in Benguet. And we essentially helped them pull together all of their resources. And in terms of talking to businesses on that side and talking to buyers, that is another um, it's another completely different process. But one common thing with that is essentially showing that you're passionate about this and that showing that you're organized through your conversations. Once you show people that you have the proper attitude to take on these solutions, they're much more willing to help, especially when you can back up with evidence that you have been taking steps towards a solution, that you have been taking on steps to gain mentorship. So, those three main messages, essentially finding and creating opportunities. You can seek them out yourself online, seek them out in your own community. To accessing your community to find people who are equally as passionate as you are and who are also willing to take risks. And three, showing through all of the conversations that you have to people you're reaching out with your passion, your engagement, and also your organization. Those three were very critical in helping us gain more credibility and trust.
That's very well said. I mean, just capping off or maybe summarizing everything I got from your three tips. Find opportunities, find your allies, and enrich your connections. Such
Yes.
a, I mean, it's such. I would say it's so SDG 17 partnerships for the goals. You know, like they
Yeah,
al-
definitely.
in a lot of conferences and a lot of networks they always have this debate, okay, which SDG matters most or which SDG applies to perhaps almost everything that's essential. And a lot of people keep on saying SDG 17 is really, it's really the core of everything. You know, without these meaningful collaborations, and I might, you know, it might sound cliche, but without these meaningful collaborations, then we won't be able to like reach wherever we wanted to go. Especially if we're tackling grand and complex challenges that really aren't that easy to deal with. And going back to you, Razels, sorry we lost you for a bit there, but yes.
Yes.
um so you were saying about you were sharing about the contextualizing cajons now.
Mhm.
Could you you know pick up from where we left off and perhaps tell us more details about that and your in your experience as you sort of you know create different sort of like offerings, for the lack of a better term,
Mhm.
with your cajons.
Mhm. I think at the core of it is truly the practicality of it, that how do we keep these students engaged? Because this is a core problem we have in the Philippines, that these students feel that the curriculum is not theirs and why should I be invested in school? I think because we can't just rely on the most excellent students. Each Filipino has to be excellent. That's what I keep thinking. And that that is so strange. Why do, why
Sorry,
do I have
sorry,
issues
Riza,
with my
we're
internet? Okay.
losing you a bit. Yeah. uh
Okay.
let's rewind to 10 seconds ago and repeat. Oh, we lost you again, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, we'll go back to Razel once again. I think there's just some internet fluctuation.
Yes. Oh,
Oh,
I'm coming
are
back.
you back? Okay, you're back. Yes.
Yes.
Sorry.
Okay. Yes. So I feel that a lot of the students I talk to especially in the province, feel that the climate crisis is a Manila issue. It's a a lot of the advocacy is it's mostly Greta Thunberg.
Yeah.
The United States and China, they're the global emitters. Why do we have to have a stake in this? And again, it's because we're the most climate vulnerable. But I would also argue that it's because we have lost our knowledge. That lost the fact that we used to obtain knowledge as Filipinos, and it is rooted in our indigeneity, and that a lot of our ancestors, this was the core of their beliefs, that the land and the water was ours. And it was because we also have a lot of the most biodiverse waters and land in the world. We have the most biodiverse rainforests and also the coral triangle. So this is really the root of our culture and our history and heritage. And I feel that we have lost that in the years of colonialism, that we have bought into our culture of overconsumerism. But at the core of it, we are really tenders of our land, and this is our main culture. So I really wanted Filipinos in their localities to understand what this meant. Particular ancestors, this means to different people. The the is the most um, okay.
Wonderful. I mean, that's very well said, Razel. And I guess this is a perfect segue to our concluding part rather of this conversation. And I'd like to just really keep this brief because we don't have a lot of time
Is that
left.
better?
We're almost at time, and so I have one question for the both of you. Well, two separate questions, honestly. Now, to Haley, um, you've joined a lot of these competitions and a lot of these opportunities, and you've met a lot of people from all over the world
It's very
and
nice.
been mentored by a lot of experts who have given a lot of insights from their own point of view and also from their experience. And for such a young age to be able to immerse in such such opportunities is really one of a kind. Now, let's imagine once cultivado scales to its full potential, what ripple effects do you hope to see? And beyond just farmers earning more in this food system that you're trying to fix, what changes will there be in communities in general?
Okay, great. This is a really good question. So, in terms of what impacts beyond just farmers earning more, we also hope that our solution will also cut down significantly on methane emissions generated from food waste. Again, because so much produce goes to waste every single year because of inefficiencies, that leads to harmful methane emissions, which are much more potent than carbon dioxide. And so, by cutting down that food waste, by rescuing all of the surplus produce that would have otherwise be thrown away, we're diverting waste while helping the farmers earn more, while also helping the environment. The second thing that we want to see as well is we want to see families being able to afford their healthy food and making these produce more affordable for consumers as well. So those are the direct impacts, but more philosophically, something that we also want to see with Gotobado as it scales to its full potential is also see a more environmentally and health conscious consumer. Because a lot of the time, people in the city are often disconnected from where their food comes from. They don't realize the journey that their food has to go from just to reach them. And they also don't realize the hands that have to carefully tend for their food, and they don't realize that they need to appreciate these people as well. So, by connecting farmers to consumers, we also hope that people gain a greater appreciation for farmers who aren't necessarily in their line of sight, people they don't see every single day. And more than that, we hope that this encourages more people, not just the youth, but also adults, to see how they can connect these disparate communities together and also find solutions for problems within their own lives as well. So obviously, we have the direct impact in terms of reducing methane emissions, helping farmers earn more while also helping consumers pay less. But more than that, we also want a philosophical change where people are more conscious of the environment and where they're proactively seeking connections and seeking solutions.
Wonderful. And Razel, so when you imagine success, now thinking of kahon ng karunungan, say years down the line, what does education look like in a climate change Philippines?
I would really put students at the forefront of it. I feel that a statistic that a lot of us don't understand is that the Philippines, actually by a study by Professor Renzo Ginto and
Mm-hmm.
also JJ Arruda, they found that the Philippines has the most number of climate anxious youth around the world. Um, and I feel that I really want to see that number change into the Philippines has the most amount of students that take climate action and convert this climate anxiety into real action. And this is really at the core of it. What we're trying to do with K&K, with this curriculum, I yearn for not only a comprehensive and holistic sustainability curriculum because we only focus on disasters management with our current curriculum, but as I said, I hope we return to our roots and understand what indigeneity and local knowledge acquisition looks like in the climate crisis. And through empowerment, through change making, we're able to turn this climate anxiety into action.
Wonderful. Now, Haley and Reza, it's been a wonderful time spent. It's been wonderful spending time with you today. I mean, the past 50 minutes, I would say, has just flown by. Thanks to all of the insights that you've given us, and I do assume that a lot of our listeners tuning in have learned a lot from this conversation, and I do hope that whatever you're doing, everything that you're doing, would inspire them to start somewhere, much like what you did when you had that spark when you started your initiatives. Now, last but not the least, before we let you go, can you tell us more about how you're going to be involved in AlterCOP 30 Philippines? What's your role? Start with you, Razel. Go for it.
Well, I have led the organization of the youth futures
Uh,
panel that we'll have. So I recruited Haley. She's amazing. I'm so glad that I met her through these communities. She will be one of our speakers. She'll be representing social enterprises and entrepreneurship. And we'll also have a youth climate scientist and also an advocate, youth advocate through government and student leadership in the Bangsamoro region. So it'll be a very, I hope, enriching panel for a lot of our listeners and show how the youth is leading climate action now, despite their less experience, despite less resources. We are leveraging the limited resources we have because we believe that this is really imminent and this affects us the most.
Wonderful. And of course, Haley. So basically, you're joining the panel.
Yes, I am joining the panel, and I'm also very lucky to have been invited by Razel and Nisha to also bring a delegation of students to AlterCOP as well. So we're bringing students from different schools around Metro Manila, which are part of our PESA coalition. It's essentially this coalition that we created to unite schools towards climate action within our school club, and we're bringing them over to AlterCOP, or we're currently working towards bringing them to AlterCOP, so they can also learn from these experts and start building these connections with people in the sustainability space in the Philippines. Because if there's one thing that can definitely catapult youth-led solutions, it's inspiration and just the idea that you can do more, and the idea that there's a possibility for you to really seek out opportunities and connect with those who are currently already experts in the space.
Wonderful. Well, we're excited to see you there on the main stage. So thank you, Razel and Haley, for signing up. And I do hope that a lot of our excited to see you there. Hoping to catch you in all of your engagements. But yes, we really look forward to to more impact from Cultivado and also from Kahon ng Karunungan's initiatives. And Well, I guess we'll be seeing you perhaps in 5 weeks on the main stage. So thank you both for spending your time with us tonight. It's been a fun conversation, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you so much,
Thank
CJ.
you, Haley and Razel. Okay. Well, folks, that was Razel Suwansing of Kahon ng Karunungan and Haley Yap of Cultivado. And they just shared with us their experience starting their own initiatives, and you know um, oh, basically also sharing with us what drove them to enact on the challenges that they see on the ground, and use their talents and their skills for something impactful. So, this is the pilot episode of the Alter Cop miniseries. We have more coming up in the coming weeks, so please stay tuned for that. And a lot of these will also be streamed on social media, including LinkedIn and YouTube. So please stay tuned for that. And if you haven't already, make sure to follow us on our socials. Just look up AlterCOP Philippines or altercop.ph on Instagram, AlterCOP Philippines on LinkedIn, and also that's the same with Facebook. Now, for the dates, keep in mind that we have 4 dates for the event. On November 8th, we're covering MSMEs for climate action. And the main stage is happening on November 26th to 28th, where the day one, which is essentially November 26th, covers youth, futures, and planetary health. Day two, on November 27th, will cover nourishing people and planet. And day three, last day on the 28th, will be covering financing futures and scaling impact. And the overall theme of AlterCOP 30 Philippines is regenerative futures. So dabbling into a lot of the aspects and the dimensions related to um, things that matter to our livelihoods and our life outcomes, and a lot of aspects in our day-to-day lives. So we do hope to catch you there. If you're interested to be involved, just go to www.altercop.com/Philippines. And there you will be able to find the programs and where you can support. If you're interested in partnering with us, so you can contact us through that page. You can also drop a message through our LinkedIn. You can also send us an email. And we're really looking forward to engaging with you, whether as partners or perhaps people attending our events. So I guess that's everything. That's the wrap for today's episode. Thank you very much for hanging out with us until the very end. It's been a really fantastic hour spending this session with you, and I do hope that you have a good rest of your week. Bye for now.